The mercenary shoved the barrel of his Glock into the base of a man's spine and smiled. He thought he'd found the easiest target in the room, a tired-looking father in a wrinkled button-down, clutching a manila folder, asking about his daughter's savings account. He thought he'd found someone disposable, someone the billionaire CEO across the lobby would watch die and finally break. He was wrong. He had no way of knowing that the quiet man standing in front of him had spent 12 years doing things that still don't exist in any official file. Things governments don't acknowledge. Things that don't have names. If this kind of story hits different for you, the kind where ordinary-looking people turn out to be anything but, subscribe to this channel right now and make sure notifications are on. We release stories like this every week, and you do not want to be the last one to find out. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what city and country you're watching from. I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. Now settle in. This one's going to take a while, and it's worth every minute. The morning started badly, the way most of Derek Callahan's mornings did lately. He'd overslept by 11 minutes because Emma had crawled into his bed sometime around 3 in the morning, complaining about a nightmare involving a purple octopus, which was apparently far more terrifying than it sounded, and he hadn't had the heart to send her back to her room. So he'd lain there in the dark, listening to her breathe, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that had been there since before his wife died. And somewhere in the middle of wondering whether he should finally get around to painting over it, he'd fallen back asleep. Then the alarm didn't go off, or it did, and he'd silenced it without knowing. And by the time he actually woke up, it was 6:57 and Emma's bus left at 7:15. He made her a peanut butter sandwich for breakfast because there was no time for eggs. He forgot her water bottle. She reminded him about it from the doorway in that patient, slightly disappointed tone she'd developed over the past year. The one that sounded nothing like a child and everything like someone who had quietly accepted that her father was doing his best, and that his best was sometimes just barely enough. He ran back inside, found the bottle in the dish rack, dried it with his shirt, and jogged back out. "You're going to do something about your hair before school," he said, because it was sticking up on one side. "You're one to talk," she said. He didn't have a response for that. She was right. He hadn't looked in a mirror yet. He put her on the bus, watched it pull away, then stood on the sidewalk for a moment with the manila folder tucked under his arm. The one containing 3 months of paperwork proving that the bank had been depositing Emma's college fund contributions into the wrong account number, a transposition error that had cost him 4 phone calls, 2 branch visits, and approximately 40 minutes on hold listening to a jazz flute rendition of a song he couldn't quite identify. Today was the day he was going to fix it in person, because apparently that was the only way anything got done anymore. He took the L downtown. He stood the whole way because the seats were full and his knees were fine. Had been fine for years now, even the left one that had taken shrapnel outside Mosul in 2011, which the doctors had told him would give him trouble into his 40s. It hadn't. He wasn't sure what that meant about the rest of the predictions those doctors had made. He tried not to think about it. Meridian Fidelity Bank occupied the ground floor of a 30-story glass tower on West Madison, and even at 8:45 on a Thursday morning, it had the low hum of a place that processed a lot of money and moved at exactly its own pace regardless of what you needed. The lobby was wide and cool and smelled faintly of recycled air and carpet cleaner. There were maybe 30 people inside, tellers behind reinforced glass, a few customers at the standing desks filling out forms, a security guard near the entrance who looked like he was thinking about his lunch. Derek took a number, 47, and sat down in one of the chairs along the wall and started reading through his paperwork again, making sure he had everything in order. That was when he noticed her. He wasn't trying to. It was just the kind of thing his brain still did automatically. Cataloged rooms, noted people, filed away details without being asked. The woman was sitting in the private banking section across the lobby, separated from the main floor by a low glass partition. Early 30s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a charcoal blazer that cost more than Derek made in a week. She was leaning slightly forward across the desk, talking to a senior banker in a way that suggested the conversation mattered a great deal, but she wasn't going to let the other person know that. Her hands were folded on the table. Her posture was careful and precise, like someone who had learned a long time ago that people watched how she sat. There was a leather portfolio open in front of her, and from where Derek was sitting, he couldn't read anything on it. But based on the thickness of the documents and the way both she and the banker kept glancing toward the private entrance at the rear of the lobby, Whatever she was finalizing was either complicated or sensitive or both. He looked away. It wasn't his business. Number 39 was called. He still had a while to wait. The first man came through the front door at 9:03. Derek noticed him the way he noticed most things, peripherally, without turning his head. Average height. Gray hoodie despite the July heat. Walked in without looking at the teller windows, without taking a number, without doing any of the things a person walking into a bank on a Thursday morning would do. His hands were relaxed at his sides, but his shoulders were forward in a particular way. The way shoulders go when someone is carrying something under their clothing and has been carrying it long enough that they've stopped noticing the weight. Derek set his folder down on his knee. 3 seconds later, 2 more men came through the side entrance near the ATM vestibule. Another 2 through the rear, from the direction of the private client offices. 5 total. They spread into the lobby in a pattern that wasn't accidental, wide enough to cover the exits, far enough apart that a single response couldn't address all of them at once. They moved like people who had rehearsed this specific floor plan. Derek had his shoes flat on the floor before the weapons even appeared. When they did appear, they came fast. 2 AR platform rifles, suppressed, not standard configuration. 2 tactical shotguns. One of the men near the center of the lobby was carrying what looked like a Glock 19 with an extended mag, and he was the one who moved first, firing a single round into the ceiling with a sound like a heavy book being dropped on tile. And by the time the plaster dust was still settling, he already had the security guard's weapon and the guard face down on the carpet. "Everyone on the floor," the man with the Glock said. His voice was flat and unhurried, the voice of someone who had done versions of this before. "Right now, hands where I can see them. You do that, nothing bad happens. Someone makes me say it twice, something bad happens." People dropped. It was the thing Derek had observed in situations like this and had never quite stopped finding unsettling. How quickly human beings compress themselves toward the floor when given a credible enough reason to. 30 seconds ago, these were people thinking about mortgage payments and dentist appointments. Now they were on the carpet with their hands out. Derek went down with them, not because he was afraid, because staying upright would have marked him immediately, and he needed 30 more seconds of not being marked. He pressed his shoulder against the base of the chair row and kept his breathing slow and used the next 90 seconds to count. 5 men, which meant this was either a very small crew or there were others he hadn't seen yet, someone on communications, possibly someone outside managing an exit corridor. The 2 with the rifles positioned themselves near the vault corridor and the teller line, respectively, which suggested they anticipated an attempted response from bank employees and had priority targets. The one with the Glock, the one who'd spoken, stayed mobile, moving through the prone hostages with a specific kind of attention, which meant he was looking for someone. Derek watched his boots moving between the bodies. He was looking for her. The woman behind the glass partition, the one with the leather portfolio. She was still in the private section, being kept seated by one of the shotgun carriers who had her at gunpoint, while another rifled through her documents with the practiced impatience of someone who knew exactly what he was looking for. Derek filed that away. Whatever this was, it had a target, and the target was in the building. "What? Hey, you!" The boots stopped in front of Derek's face. He looked up slowly. The man looking down at him was maybe 35, light stubble, a scar across the bridge of his nose that had been set wrong and healed slightly crooked. His eyes were the kind of calm that came either from professional training or from being constitutionally indifferent to other people's suffering, and Derek couldn't tell which yet. "Stand up," the man said. Derek stood up. "What's your name?" "Derek Callahan." "What do you do, Derek?" "I work facilities maintenance at a school district. I'm here about a bank error in my daughter's account." The man looked at him for a moment the way people look at things they're about to use and then discard. He took in the wrinkled shirt, the manila folder, the average build, the unremarkable face. He took in everything that was designed to be taken in and dismissed. "Come with me," he said. Someone behind Derek made a small sound. A woman somewhere to his left, involuntary. A protest without words. The mercenary didn't acknowledge it. Derek walked. They took him through the door behind the teller line, past the row of empty offices, and into a corridor that ran alongside the vault room. It was quieter back here. The marble gave way to painted concrete. There was a single overhead fixture throwing flat white light. The door behind them was thick, the kind with a hydraulic closer and a soundproofing seal along the frame. Derek heard it engage behind him with a sound like a held breath releasing. The mercenary walked him to the wall and shoved him against it, not viciously, just efficiently, the way you'd handle a piece of furniture you needed to move. "Here's the situation," the man said. He had a slight accent Derek hadn't caught at first. Eastern European, maybe. Not Russian exactly. "Your job right now is to exist. You stand here, you look scared, and when my boss brings the woman back here in a few minutes, you're going to help convince her that we're serious. You understand what I mean by serious?" "Yes," Derek said. "Good. Because if she doesn't hand over what we came for, you're going to stop existing, and your job is to make sure she believes that. Which means I need you to actually be scared. You're not scared enough." Derek looked at him. "I'm scared," he said. "You don't look it." "I hide it. It's a thing I do." The mercenary studied him with the mild interest of someone who wasn't sure whether that was defiance or just an odd thing to say. He decided it didn't matter. He pressed the barrel of the Glock against Derek's lower back and left it there, a reminder, and turned his attention toward the corridor door to listen for radio traffic from the lobby. That was the mistake. Not the big one. He hadn't made the big one yet. This was a smaller one, the kind that precedes the big one by about 90 seconds, the way a small crack in a dam precedes everything that comes after it. He turned his attention elsewhere. He let the situation feel like it was under control. And Derek stopped performing, not dramatically, not with a deep breath or a hardening of the jaw or any of the things that happen in movies to signal that someone has shifted into a different mode. It was quieter than that. More internal. Like a door somewhere inside him that had been standing open, slightly, just enough to let in the noise of ordinary life. Emma's laughter, the water stain on the ceiling, the jazz flute on hold, swinging shut. He took stock without moving his eyes. Corridor dimensions. Approximately 12 feet wide, 40 feet long. One exit at either end, the vault door, which required a keypad, and the door back to the teller line, which was the one they'd come through and which the mercenary was now partially facing. One overhead light. No cameras in this section. He'd checked when they walked through and the housing for the camera near the ceiling was present, but the indicator light was off, which meant either it was broken or someone had already disabled the system, which, given the level of operational planning this crew had demonstrated, was almost certainly the latter. The mercenary had his Glock in his right hand, barrel still pressed against the small of Derek's back, but his grip had eased by about 30% in the last 45 seconds. Derek had felt it change. The man was listening to something on his earpiece. His weight had shifted to his left foot, the folders. Derek was still holding in his left hand contained 17 pages of bank correspondence, 3 highlighted account statements, and a photocopy of Emma's original enrollment form from when Sarah had set the fund up 4 years ago. Sarah's handwriting was on that form. Her actual handwriting, in blue ink, slightly tilted to the right the way it always was. Derek set the folder down carefully against the wall. "Hey," the mercenary started. Derek moved. It wasn't elegant. It never was, outside of training facilities. Real violence in confined spaces was brutal and imprecise and over in seconds, and what it required wasn't finesse so much as commitment, the willingness to do something completely and without hesitation and not stop doing it until it was done. He rotated left, inside the gun arm, his right hand locking the mercenary's wrist in a grip that redirected the weapon outward before the man's brain had finished processing that something was happening. His left elbow came around in a tight arc that caught the mercenary across the throat, not as hard as he could have because he needed the man quiet, not dead, and there was a difference, but hard enough that the cartilage compressed and the resulting pain and loss of breath dropped him to one knee in under 2 seconds. The Glock transferred hands. Derek checked the safety, confirmed the chamber, and tucked it at his waistline at the back. The mercenary was on the floor making no sound because he didn't have enough air to make sound. His hands were going to his throat. His eyes were wide with the specific surprise of someone who had built a career around correctly reading threat levels and had just encountered a catastrophic failure in that skill. Derek crouched in front of him. "I need your radio," he said quietly. "The earpiece too, and I need you to stay down and stay quiet, and this gets worse for you a lot slower." The man's eyes moved. He was calculating. "Don't," Derek said. The man gave up the radio. Derek pulled the earpiece, looped it over his own ear, listened. 3 voices on the channel. The primary. The man he'd identified as the commander, still in the lobby. A second voice monitoring exits. A third giving updates on the woman in the private section. They were moving to phase 2, which based on context meant they were about to bring her back here to this corridor and use Derek as the object lesson they'd planned. He had maybe 4 minutes before someone came looking. He looked down at the folder on the floor, at the account statements with the wrong numbers highlighted in yellow, at the corner of Sarah's enrollment form. He picked it up, set it on the narrow utilities shelf on the wall. Then he moved to the far end of the corridor, put his back to the wall beside the junction, and waited. The exhausted school district facilities worker was gone. Something older had taken his place. The first voice Derek heard through the earpiece belonged to the commander. Renko, bring the civilian to the main floor. We're moving to the next phase. Silence on the channel. 10 seconds. 20. Renko. More silence. Derek pressed himself flatter against the wall beside the corridor junction and waited. He'd counted approximately 3 minutes since he'd taken the radio. The commander would give it another 30 seconds before sending someone to check. He was right. 28 seconds later, a new voice came on the channel. One of the men from the lobby, the one monitoring the teller line. I'll check on him. Derek heard the door at the far end of the corridor engage. Footsteps. One set, moving at a pace that wasn't quite urgent yet, but was getting there. The man came around the corner and stopped when he saw Renko on the floor. He had maybe half a second to process it before Derek came off the wall. It went faster this time. The man was bigger than Renko, but slower to react, and in a 12-foot corridor, there's nowhere for size to be an advantage. Derek caught him high, used the wall, and put him down hard enough that when the back of his head hit the concrete, the fight was already over. He stripped the tactical shotgun, confirmed it was loaded, 5 rounds, buckshot, slung it behind him, and took the man's earpiece too, though it was the same channel. Now the commander had 2 men who weren't responding. The radio crackled. Torres, status. Derek didn't answer. He moved back down the corridor toward the vault end, staying low, using the time he had left. In the lobby, Isabella Vaughn was doing the thing she'd been doing in boardrooms and hostile negotiations for the better part of a decade, buying time by appearing to cooperate without actually cooperating at all. The man in front of her went by Carver. He hadn't told her that. She'd overheard one of the others use his name twice, which was a small operational sloppiness that told her something about how this crew managed stress under pressure. He was standing across the conference table in the private banking section, the leather portfolio open in front of him, going through the documents inside with a focused and unhurried attention that she found more unsettling than the gun. Most people who pointed guns at Isabella Vaughn wanted money. Carver wasn't interested in money. He was interested in a 47-page technical specification document that was not in the portfolio, had never been in the portfolio, and which was currently sitting encrypted on a server in a facility in Reston, Virginia, behind 3 layers of authentication that required her direct biometric input. Ms. Vaughn, he said, without looking up, I'm going to explain the situation to you one more time, and I want you to actually hear it this time instead of just listening. I'm hearing you fine, she said. What you have is a logistics coordination system for military transport operations. A very specific system. One your company developed under a contract that, as far as the public is aware, doesn't exist. He turned a page. We've been hired to acquire the access architecture, not the data, not the financials, just the authentication pathway. 3 minutes of your time and your fingerprint on a tablet, and this is over. Who hired you? That's not information that's available to you. Then we don't have anything to talk about. He looked up at her then, and she made herself hold his gaze because looking away would have been a concession, and she had decided before this conversation started that she wasn't making any. There's a man in the back corridor, Carver said. A civilian. School maintenance worker based on his paperwork. He has a daughter. He paused, letting that sit. You don't know him. He doesn't know you. He has nothing to do with any of this. And if you continue to waste my time, I'm going to bring him out here and demonstrate to everyone in this room that I mean what I say. Isabella kept her face still. It required more effort than she showed. If you hurt someone, she said, you lose your leverage. I'm not giving you access codes from a federal security contractor because a stranger gets hurt. That's not how this works. You know that, and I know that. What I know, Carver said, is that people make different calculations when the consequences are right in front of them. He picked up his radio. Renko, bring the civilian to the main floor. Nothing came back. The silence lasted long enough to become something other than silence. Carver's expression didn't change exactly, but something around the edges of it shifted. A tightening, barely visible, the look of someone whose mental model of the situation had just encountered a discrepancy it couldn't immediately explain. He tried again. Renko. Then Torres. Status. Isabella watched him. She kept her breathing even and her hands folded on the table, and she watched the specific quality of attention that moved across his face as the silence continued. She had spent her entire adult life reading rooms and reading people, and what she read right now was a man whose confidence was encountering the first pressure it had faced all morning. Someone checked the back corridor, Carver said. He said it calmly. But he was already moving toward the doorway, one hand on his weapon, and the calm had the texture of something being maintained by force of will rather than genuine certainty. From somewhere deeper in the building, past the thick door, there was a sound, brief and muffled, then nothing. Carver stopped. From the lobby behind Isabella, she heard one of the other mercenaries say something low and sharp in a language she didn't recognize, and then another sound, this one clearer, closer, that she couldn't immediately identify. Then the second mercenary near the teller line dropped to his knees and didn't get back up. Derek had come through the ceiling access panel. It wasn't something he'd planned from the beginning. Plans at this stage were frameworks, not scripts. You built them around what was available, and what was available in the utility corridor above the teller line was a 2-foot crawl space, a maintenance access panel, and a position directly above the man who'd been covering the teller windows with a rifle, and who hadn't thought to look up once in the last 4 minutes, because people generally don't look up. The drop was controlled. The contact was fast. The rifle went to the floor and stayed there because Derek's knee was on the man's back before the man understood that something had fallen on him, and by the time that understanding arrived, the fight was done. 3 down, 2 left, Carver, who was moving somewhere near the private section, and 1 more near the main entrance who hadn't been on the radio in the last few minutes, and whose position Derek needed to re-establish. He pressed against the teller counter and listened. The lobby was quiet in the way that scared places are quiet. Not empty, but compressed. He could hear breathing. A woman somewhere near the center of the room was crying very quietly, almost silently, the kind of crying that happens when someone has decided that making noise would be dangerous. Someone else was murmuring something repetitive and low, possibly counting, possibly praying. He couldn't tell. He did not look at any of them directly because looking at them would make them real in a way that he needed them to not be right now. He would deal with that later. He was good at dealing with things later. It was one of the few skills from his previous life that translated cleanly into the one he'd built after. He picked up the fallen rifle, checked the magazine. 14 rounds remaining. The earpiece was still in. He heard Carver's voice, tighter now. Vasquez, where are you? Talk to me right now. A new voice, the one near the entrance. I'm here. What's happening back there? I don't know yet. Get eyes on the floor. Anyone tries to move, you put them back down. Copy. Derek had a position now. The last man, Vasquez, was somewhere near the front of the lobby, which meant between the entrance and the cluster of hostages in the center. He couldn't go that direction without exposing himself across open floor. He needed to move differently. He went back the way he'd come, through the teller door, back into the corridor, but this time he went all the way to the end and used the utility access on the left side to come around behind the standing desks near the lobby's western wall. It took 90 seconds. It felt longer. Everything felt longer when you were moving in a building full of people who were counting on the outcome going a particular way and had no way to know which direction it was actually going. He came around the corner of the standing desk island and found Vasquez with his back to him, scanning the center of the lobby, watching the hostages. Derek moved up behind him in 4 steps and had the man's weapon arm bent behind his back before Vasquez got the first syllable of a response out. And when his knee went into the back of Vasquez's leg and brought him down, Derek already had a forearm across his throat in a hold that wasn't going to cause permanent damage, but was going to cause the man to stop making decisions for the next several minutes. Vasquez went limp. 4 down. Derek eased him to the floor, stripped his sidearm, checked the lobby. The hostages were still down. A few heads had turned instinctively toward the sound. He made a short, controlled gesture. Flat hand, downward, stay down. And a few of them understood and passed it along in whispers. A small act of trust in a man they couldn't see clearly. He didn't take time to be moved by it. He picked up the radio. "Carver," he said. A long pause. "Who is this?" Carver said. His voice had changed. Not dramatically, but it had changed. "The maintenance worker," Derek said. "You picked the wrong person to bring into the back." Another pause, longer this time. "You have training," Carver said. It wasn't a question. "Some." "How much?" "Enough for today." He heard Carver breathe out through his nose, a short, controlled sound, the kind a man makes when he's rapidly reorganizing his understanding of a situation and doesn't like the direction the reorganization is going. "You've taken out 4 of my people. You think that changes anything? I still have the woman." "I know." "Then you know you haven't won anything yet." "I'm not trying to win anything," Derek said. "I'm trying to finish this." "By doing what exactly?" Derek didn't answer. He set the radio down on the standing desk and moved. Isabella heard Carver's side of the conversation and understood most of it from context. The maintenance worker. The one they'd dragged to the back corridor as a prop. He'd taken out 4 trained mercenaries, apparently, which should have been impossible and clearly wasn't, and now Carver was standing 6 feet from her with his gun out and his operational plan in pieces and only one asset remaining, her. He turned back to face her. There was something different in his expression now. Still controlled, still professional, but underneath it a quality she recognized from the worst boardroom moments of her career. The look of a man who has realized that the problem in front of him is larger than he initially assessed, and that he is going to have to do something he didn't want to do. "New timeline," he said. "Access code, right now, or this conversation changes in a way you won't like." "You're not going to get what you came for," Isabella said. "Whatever he did out there, that's your problem, not mine. My answer doesn't change based on your staffing issues." Something flickered across his face. Not quite anger. Something colder. "Your answer might change based on something else," he said. He reached across the table and spun the leather portfolio around to face her, pushing it toward her. In the center, between 2 of the documents he'd already examined, was a photograph. It had been printed on plain paper, slightly pixelated, like a screenshot from a surveillance camera. It showed the exterior of a building she recognized immediately, the Whitmore Academy, on the north side. Emma Callahan's school. Isabella stared at it. "We prepared contingencies," Carver said quietly. "I didn't want to use them. I still don't. But I will use them if this man out there forces my hand. And I want to make sure you understand that." She kept her face neutral. She understood exactly what he was doing, pivoting from direct leverage to indirect, from threatening her to threatening something connected to the man who'd just dismantled his crew, because the man himself wasn't reachable, and something that mattered to him might be. It was competent strategy. It was also the move of someone running out of options. What Carver hadn't calculated was that showing her the photograph had told her something she hadn't known 10 seconds ago. That the maintenance worker was not, in fact, a maintenance worker, or at least hadn't always been one, and that whoever he really was, Carver's organization had done enough research to know his pressure points, which meant this crew had a target file on him, which meant the quiet man with the manila folder had a history significant enough to appear in the research of a professional paramilitary contractor. Isabella filed that away and kept her mouth shut. "I need your answer," Carver said. "My answer is no," she said. "It was no when you walked in here, and it's no now, and threatening a child is not going to change that, because you and I both know that actually following through on that would eliminate any remaining possibility of you getting what you came for. You're a professional, so act like one." His jaw tightened. For a moment she genuinely couldn't tell what he was going to do, and that moment was long enough to be unpleasant. Then the power went out. The building's emergency lighting kicked in 3 seconds later, low amber strips along the baseboards, enough to navigate by, not enough to see faces clearly. The lobby beyond the glass partition went to shadows. Someone out there made a sharp, startled sound and was immediately shushed by someone else. Carver moved fast, coming around the table, getting behind Isabella with his arm across her collarbone and the gun at her temple, putting her between himself and whatever was in the dark lobby beyond the glass. "Smart," he said, to the room, to the darkness, to whoever was out there. Cutting the power. Very smart. Now what? Nothing answered him. Come on, he said. You've had a good run. 4 of my people. Lights out. Very impressive. But right now I have your audience and my gun is on her head, so let's talk about what happens next. Still nothing. She could feel the tension in his arm against her collarbone. Not shaking, not even close to shaking, but coiled in a way that a held breath is coiled. He was looking everywhere at once, which meant he wasn't focused anywhere specific, which she understood from years of watching people under pressure was what happened when a controlled person started losing the ability to control the variables. I know you're in there, Carver said. His voice had dropped lower. Not quiet out of calm, but quiet the way things get quiet when the air pressure changes before something breaks. I know you can hear me, so hear this. You come out right now, both of you walk. Her and you. I take the loss, I walk away. My organization gets what it needs another way. But if you make me stand here in the dark any longer, I start making decisions I can't take back. The amber emergency light nearest to the doorway flickered once. A voice came from the darkness to Carver's left. Not from across the room. From much closer. From almost directly beside him. You're gripping too tight, the voice said quietly. Your arm. You're going to tire your shoulder out. Carver spun left and fired twice. The shots hit the wall at shoulder height, both of them, which was what happened when you fired at a voice that was no longer where the voice had been. Isabella felt him pull her sideways, recalibrating, trying to find the new position, and in the half-second of confusion, when his grip shifted and his weight was wrong, she did what every self-defense instructor had ever told her, and what she'd always assumed she'd be too frightened to actually do when the moment came. She dropped her weight completely, legs going to rubber, turning herself into 140 pounds of dead weight that Carver's arm, already compensating for the lateral movement, wasn't ready for. She hit the floor. The gun went somewhere above her. She heard it discharge once more, and then there was movement in the dark above her. Fast, controlled, 2 impacts in rapid sequence, the sound of something hitting furniture, and then a much larger sound as a body went into the glass partition, and the partition gave way, and the ambient noise from the lobby came rushing in. Then it was over. She knew it was over before the emergency light stabilized because the quality of the air changed. The specific tautness that had been in it since 9:03 that morning just wasn't there anymore. Gone between one breath and the next. She lay on the floor for a moment, cheek against the carpet, listening to the sounds of a room coming back to itself. Someone weeping openly now, no longer trying to stay quiet, and other voices rising around that. And somewhere near the entrance, the distant wail of sirens that had probably been getting closer for the last 10 minutes without anyone having the presence of mind to notice. A hand appeared in front of her face. She took it. It pulled her up. In the low amber light, she could see him clearly for the first time since this had started. The wrinkled button-down, darker now in several places she didn't want to examine too closely. The manila folder somehow still tucked under his left arm. He had a cut above his right eyebrow that was bleeding in a way he didn't seem to notice or have time to care about. He was breathing harder than he'd probably like. His hands had a slight tremor that he was managing by keeping them occupied, which was something she recognized as a body's way of processing an adrenal event that the mind had been too busy to process in real time. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," she said. Then, "You?" He glanced at the places on his shirt she'd been trying not to look at. "Superficial. I'm fine." She believed him, and she didn't believe him simultaneously. And the combination of those two things was disorienting in a way she didn't have language for yet. "My daughter," he said. I wasn't asking her, he was saying it to himself, already turning toward the lobby. "I need to get Emma." "She's not here," Isabella said. "She's at school." "I know, I need to call the school." He touched his shirt pocket, found it empty, looked toward the floor. "My phone was in my jacket. I left my jacket on the chair in the lobby." I was already moving toward the lobby doors when the first SWAT officers came through the entrance with their lights on and their weapons up and their voices loud and their entire posture oriented toward a situation that had already resolved itself in ways they were going to spend the next several days trying to reconstruct. Derek stopped, raised his hands, kept the manila folder against his ribs. The lead officer was shouting instructions, standard protocol, hands visible, don't move, identify yourself. And Derek was complying with all of it, unhurried, because compliance in this moment was the correct tactical choice and also the least complicated path to a working phone and his daughter's voice on the other end of it. Isabella stood in the doorway of the private section and watched him comply with the officer's instructions, watched him let them push him to his knees on the lobby carpet among the people he had just spent the last 20-some minutes protecting without any of them knowing it. And she felt something land in her chest that she couldn't immediately name. She'd been in rooms with powerful people her entire career: senators, generals, tech founders, financial architects who moved 9 figures before breakfast. She knew what power looked like when it was performed, and she knew what it looked like when it was simply a thing someone had, the way some people have perfect pitch or an exceptional memory. The man on the floor with his hands behind his head and his wrinkled shirt and his manila folder had the second kind. And watching him kneel there patiently while the SWAT officer confirmed he wasn't a threat, watching him absorb that particular indignity with the same steady quality he'd apparently brought to everything else that had happened in the last 40 minutes, Isabella understood something that she suspected she was going to keep understanding in layers for quite some time. She didn't know who he actually was, but she knew, with a clarity that had nothing to do with logic, that she was going to find out. Outside, through the glass front of the bank, the July morning was burning on without them. The L rumbling somewhere overhead, cabs pressing through the intersection, pedestrians behind the police tape pulling out their phones to take pictures of a scene that looked, from the outside, like a very bad day at a downtown Chicago bank. None of them knew what had happened in there. None of them would. The man on the floor didn't intend for them to. He just wanted his phone. The SWAT team's initial sweep took 11 minutes. Derek counted them from his position on the lobby floor, hands still visible, watching the officers move through the space with the practiced efficiency of people who had trained for scenarios like this and were now encountering the aftermath of one they hadn't been present for. They cleared the teller area, the back corridor, the private banking section, the vault corridor, calling out room by room in that clipped military shorthand that Derek recognized from a different chapter of his life. And each room came back the same way: clear, clear, clear. The lead officer, a heavy-set man with a CPD tactical patch and the kind of face that had learned not to show surprise, came back to the lobby center and stood over Derek for a moment with an expression that was trying to be professionally neutral and not quite getting there. "You're the one that did this," he said. It wasn't a question. "I was in the building," Derek said. "That's not what I asked." "It's what I'm saying." The officer studied him for another few seconds, then looked at the 5 men laid out at various points around the lobby and the corridor beyond, all of them flex-cuffed now by the SWAT team, none of them in a condition to offer much resistance. He looked back at Derek. "We're going to need to talk to you for a while," he said. "I understand," Derek said. "I need to make a phone call first. My daughter is at school, and I need her to know I'm okay." Something in the officer's expression shifted, not softened exactly, but adjusted. He reached into his vest and handed Derek a phone without comment. Derek dialed the school's main office from memory, gave his name, asked them to pull Emma from her second period class, and tell her that her dad was fine and would be there by noon. The woman on the other end said she would and asked if everything was all right, and Derek said yes and handed the phone back. "Thank you," he said. The officer put the phone away. "You want to tell me what happened here?" "Not particularly," Derek said, "but I will." He told them a version of it. Not a false version. Derek had a particular discomfort with outright lying to law enforcement that had nothing to do with ethics and everything to do with the practical reality that lies required maintenance, and he didn't have the energy for it. But a version. The way a photograph is a version of the thing it shows, accurate in its way, incomplete by design. He described a hostage situation. 5 armed men, military-grade weapons, clear operational planning. He described being separated from the main group and taken to the back corridor. He described a window of opportunity when the guard got careless and he exploited it. He described moving through the building and neutralizing the remaining threats one at a time. He did not describe the specific techniques. He did not describe his training, his history, or the 12 years that had preceded his current career managing building maintenance for a school district on the northwest side. When the detective, a younger woman named Okafor, who had arrived in the second wave and was clearly sharper than she was letting on, asked how a facilities worker managed to incapacitate 5 professionals with military hardware. Derek said he'd been lucky, and he said it in a tone that invited no further discussion of the subject. Detective Okafor wrote something in her notebook and looked at him steadily. "Lucky," she said. "Lucky," he said. She didn't believe him. He could see that she didn't believe him. He also saw her make a decision, visible in the slight change of her posture, to file that disbelief away for now and work the angles she had available to her. "The woman in the private section," Okafor said. "Ms. Vaughn. She says the mercenaries turned on each other during the incident. Internal conflict over the operation parameters." "Is that what she says?" Derek said. "That's what she says." Okafor watched him. "You have any reason to disagree with that account?" Derek considered the question for exactly as long as it warranted. "No," he said. "She wrote something else. Whatever it was brief." Isabella Vaughn gave her statement in the private banking manager's office, separated from the main floor by 2 walls and a closed door, with a CPD detective on one side of the desk and a man from the federal contractor's legal team who had arrived with remarkable speed on the other. The federal man's name was Griffith. He had the pleasant, practiced manner of someone whose entire professional purpose was to prevent information from traveling in unauthorized directions. "The important thing," Griffith said, not for the first time, "is that the authentication system was never compromised. The documents in the portfolio don't contain access architecture. They're non-classified operational summaries. Whoever hired these men was working from incomplete intelligence." "That's reassuring," the detective said, in a tone suggesting it was not particularly reassuring. "The contract itself remains classified," Griffith continued. "The specifics of what these men were attempting to acquire are not something we can discuss in detail at the jurisdictional level. I want to be clear that this isn't obstruction. It's standard federal contractor protocol, and there are channels." "What I want to know," the detective said, cutting him off with the patience of someone who had dealt with federal contractor protocols before and had developed a specific immunity to them, "is how 5 armed men with suppressed rifles walked into a downtown Chicago bank at 9 in the morning and were neutralized by the time we got here. And who did the neutralizing?" Isabella had been sitting quietly with her hands folded for the last 20 minutes, and she continued to do so now. "I told you," she said. "It appeared that there was a conflict within the group itself. There was shooting. There was fighting. Some of them went to the back corridor. When the lights came back on, they were down. All 5 of them. All 5 of them. And you didn't see anyone else in the building who might have—" "I was on the floor with a gun pointed at me for most of it," Isabella said. "I was focused on staying still and doing what I was told." The detective looked at her. Isabella met the look with the same expression she used on venture capitalists who were trying to pressure her into equity concessions. Pleasant, patient, and completely immovable. "Right," the detective said. She wrote something in her notebook, probably the same word Okafor had written in the lobby. They let Derek go at 11:40. He retrieved his jacket from the chair where he'd left it. Someone had folded it, which he found oddly touching, and his phone, which had 17 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize and 1 missed call from Emma's school, which had probably been a callback to confirm the message he'd sent. He checked the unknown number. No voicemail. He put his phone in his pocket. His folder was on the floor near the chair. He picked it up. The paperwork was fine, more or less. The account statements were bent at one corner, and one of the highlighted pages had gotten a heel print on it at some point during the morning, but the information was still legible. He straightened them as best he could and tucked the folder under his arm. He found his car in the parking structure 2 blocks over and sat in it for a while with the engine off. His hands were steadier than they'd been inside the building. The tremor had been brief. It always was, and he'd learned over the years not to read too much into it in either direction. It wasn't weakness, and it wasn't trauma in any clinical sense he'd been able to identify. It was just the body settling after an acute event, the way a pot settles after you take it off the heat. It didn't mean anything was wrong. It just meant something had happened. Something had happened. He sat with that for a minute, then started the engine. Emma's school had a pickup protocol for unscheduled parent arrivals that involved signing in at the main office and waiting in the lobby on a bench that was designed for people considerably shorter than Derek. He sat on it anyway, filling out the visitor log while the administrative assistant went to find Emma, and while he waited, he looked at the framed student artwork on the walls, construction paper collages mostly, and a few charcoal drawings that the third graders had done, simple house shapes and family figures with circle heads and stick arms. He heard her before he saw her. Her footsteps in the hallway had a specific rhythm he'd been able to identify since she was 4 years old, the slightly offbeat quality of a kid who was perpetually half a step ahead of wherever she was trying to get to. She came around the corner and stopped when she saw him, and he watched her face do the thing it did when she was deciding between two very different responses and hadn't made up her mind yet. Then she made up her mind and came across the lobby at a speed that was technically not running because one foot was always on the ground. He caught her and she pressed her face into his collar, and he held on. She didn't say anything for a while. He didn't either. Over her shoulder, he could see the receptionist pretending very intently to look at her computer screen. "Mrs. Patterson said you called and said you were fine," Emma said finally, into his collar. "I am fine." "You smell weird." "I had a long morning." She pulled back far enough to look at him. Her eyes went to his forehead, the cut above his eyebrow that he'd taped with a bandage from a first aid kit the EMTs had handed him before he left the bank. She put 2 fingers on it, very lightly, the way she'd seen him do to her scrapes and bruises since she was small enough to fit in his lap. "What happened?" she asked. "There was an issue at the bank," he said. "It's resolved." She studied his face with that particular Emma quality of attention, the one that made him sometimes feel like he was being read more accurately than he intended. "Were you scared?" she asked. He thought about it. "A little," he said. "But it's okay now?" "It's okay now." She looked at him for another moment, then nodded once in the decisive way that meant she had completed her assessment and reached a verdict she was willing to accept. She took his hand. "Did you fix the bank thing?" she asked as they walked toward the exit. "The account thing?" He stopped. He genuinely hadn't thought about it. Somewhere between the utility crawl space and the detective's questions, and the parking structure and the bench with the construction paper collages, he had completely forgotten that the reason he'd gone to Meridian Fidelity Bank in the first place was a transposition error in a savings account that he'd been trying to fix for 3 months. "Not yet," he said. Emma absorbed this without visible disappointment, which was one of the things about her that he sometimes found harder to take than disappointment would have been. "We can go back another day," she said. "Yeah," he said, "another day. But..." Isabella called him at 4:17. He was in the kitchen making pasta because it was the thing he could make reliably and quickly, and he hadn't eaten since 6:30 that morning, and the tiredness had settled into him in a way that made anything more complicated than boiling water feel aspirational. Emma was at the table doing homework, or performing the motions of doing homework, while actually drawing in the margins of her math worksheet, which Derek had decided not to address until after he'd eaten something. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. The same one that had called 17 times while he was in the bank. He looked at it. "Emma, keep working," he said. He took the phone to the hallway. "Mr. Callahan," Isabella said. Her voice was different on the phone than it had been in the bank. Still precise, still carrying the particular authority of someone who had never been talked over twice in her life, but quieter, more deliberate, like she was choosing every word slightly more carefully than usual. "This is Isabella Vaughn. I apologize for the earlier calls. I wanted to make sure you were reachable before I said anything to anyone." "I noticed the calls," Derek said. "Are you somewhere you can talk?" He looked back toward the kitchen. Emma had put her pencil down and appeared to be drawing something elaborate on the corner of her worksheet. "For a few minutes," he said. "I want to thank you," Isabella said. "I know that's inadequate. I'm aware that what I'm saying doesn't come close to the actual weight of what happened today. But I needed to say it before anything else." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. That's why I want to." A pause. "I also want to tell you that what I said to the investigators was deliberate. I'm not going to ask you to corroborate a specific story, but I wanted you to know that whatever version you gave them, I made sure mine didn't contradict it in any meaningful way." Derek leaned against the hallway wall. "I noticed that too," he said. "Thank you." "What you did today?" She stopped. Started again. "I've been in negotiations where the stakes were significant. I've been in situations where I thought I understood the ceiling of what people were capable of under pressure. I don't think I understood it before today." He didn't say anything. "I want to do something," Isabella said, "for you and your daughter, not as a transaction, not as compensation for services rendered, I'm not offering you a contract or a position or anything that has a clause attached to it. I just want to do something that's actually useful. Ms. Vaughn, Isabella. Isabella, he said, you covered for me with the investigators. That's more than enough. It's not, though. He rubbed the back of his neck. In the kitchen, Emma had abandoned any pretense of homework and was now visibly drawing something that involved what appeared to be a very large octopus. How did you get this number? He asked. A short pause. Resources, she said, in a tone that didn't elaborate further and didn't apologize for not elaborating. Mr. Callahan, I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable or create an obligation. I just want to know if there's anything I can do. The bank issue, he said. The one I went in there to fix this morning. Tell me. He told her. The savings account, the transposition error, the 3 months of phone calls, the number that was wrong by 2 digits, and the $4,000 in contributions sitting in an account that didn't belong to his daughter. She was quiet for a moment on the other end. That's what you want, she said. Just that. That's what I want. Another pause. Longer. Okay, she said finally. I'll have it sorted by end of business tomorrow. Someone from my office will contact the bank directly. You don't need to contact anyone directly, Derek said. The standard process is fine. The standard process took 3 months, Isabella said. I'll have it sorted tomorrow. He thought about arguing the point and decided it wasn't worth it. All right, he said. Is there anything else? He looked back toward the kitchen. Emma had glanced up from her artwork and was watching the hallway with the particular attention of a child pretending not to pay attention. He turned slightly away. No, he said. That's everything. Then I'll let you go. She paused one more time. Mr. Callahan, what you did today, I don't think you'll ever know how far the consequences of what you prevented actually reach. The system those men were trying to access protects logistics operations across a significant portion of the country's defense infrastructure. If they'd gotten it, she stopped. It would have been very bad. A lot of people who'll never know your name are safer tonight because of what you did this morning. Derek listened to that. He didn't know what to do with it. He'd never known what to do with that kind of statement, even when the people saying it had the clearance to say it and the full knowledge of the specific operations it referred to. You could acknowledge it, you could be glad about it, but you couldn't hold it in your hands, and you couldn't trade it for anything, and when you went back into the kitchen to finish making pasta, it didn't come with you in any way that felt solid. Emma did, though. Emma was solid. She was right there at the table with her math worksheet full of octopus drawings, looking up at him when he came back in with the particular expression she'd had since she was about 3 years old. Expectant, curious, entirely present. Who was that? She asked. Someone from the bank, he said. Did they fix it? Working on it, he said. She accepted this and went back to her drawing. Derek went back to the stove. The water had boiled over slightly while he was in the hallway, and there was a wet ring on the burner that he blotted with a dish towel that was already due for the laundry. He made pasta. He set 2 plates on the table. He sat down across from his daughter and looked at her worksheet, which now featured a family of octopuses in the margin, all of them rendered with surprising anatomical accuracy for a 2nd grader, and he asked her what she was going to call them. She considered this very seriously. The dad one is Gerald, she said. Gerald, he repeated. He's the biggest one, but he's not scary, she said. He just looks scary because his arms are long. Actually, he's very gentle. Derek looked at the drawing for a moment. Yeah, he said. I can see that. Emma stabbed a piece of pasta and ate it and picked up her pencil to add something to Gerald's face. Can we get ice cream after dinner? She asked. It's a school night. It's 4:30. The answer is still probably no. Probably no or definitely no. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the absolute focused sincerity of a child who understood exactly which end of the probably to definitely spectrum was negotiable and was parking herself firmly at the favorable edge of it. Probably no, he said. She smiled and went back to her drawing. She knew what probably no meant coming from him. She'd always known. He ate his pasta and listened to the sounds of the apartment. The refrigerator cycling, a neighbor's television through the wall, the elevated train a few blocks over. And let the day settle around him the way days eventually do, the hard ones and the ordinary ones both, folding themselves down into something that could be carried. Outside the kitchen window, Chicago was running on without comment. The street below was doing what streets do at 4:30 on a Thursday. Kids on bikes, a delivery guy double parked, a woman with a stroller navigating around a broken section of sidewalk with the weary expertise of someone who had done it many times before. Nobody looking up, nobody marking the moment. A few miles south, in a federal holding facility, 5 men in flex cuffs were about to have a very long conversation with people who would want to know who had hired them, and what they'd been sent for, and how a bank hostage situation involving military-grade weapons and 5 trained operatives had concluded with all 5 of them unconscious before the first responding units arrived on scene. Those conversations would generate reports. The reports would go somewhere. The somewhere was not Derek's problem. His problem was the pasta, which Emma had declared too salty, and the ice cream question, which remained technically unresolved, and the water stain on the ceiling in his bedroom that he'd been meaning to paint over since before Sarah died, and that he was almost certainly going to continue not painting over for reasons that had nothing to do with the ceiling. Those were his problems. They were enough. The reports started showing up on Friday morning, not the official ones. Those were still being compiled by CPD's Major Crimes Unit in coordination with the federal contractor's legal team and a quiet office in the Department of Defense that had no listed phone number and whose representatives had arrived at the Meridian Fidelity scene Thursday afternoon in a car with government plates and no insignia. Those reports would take weeks, possibly months, and most of what went into them would never come out the other side in any form accessible to the public. The ones that showed up Friday morning were the news kind. Derek saw the first one on his phone while he was packing Emma's lunch. The headline called it a dramatic downtown hostage situation, and the article described 5 armed men, an unknown number of hostages, and a resolution that CPD's public statement attributed to tactical intervention and internal conflict within the perpetrating group. There was a photo of the bank's exterior taken from behind the police tape, the kind of image that communicated chaos by showing its absence. Yellow tape, police vehicles, a building that looked exactly like a building. Isabella Vaughn was mentioned by name in the 4th paragraph as a hostage who had been present and was unharmed. Derek Callahan was not mentioned at all. He put his phone down and finished making the sandwich. "Turkey or peanut butter?" he called toward Emma's room. "Turkey," she called back. Then, "Actually, peanut butter." "Turkey it is," he said. A brief pause. "That's not fair." "Life lesson," he said. He heard her make a sound that was equal parts indignation and reluctant amusement, and then the sound of her backpack being zipped, which meant she was almost ready, which meant he had approximately 4 minutes before the morning became an exercise in controlled urgency. He put turkey in the sandwich. He wrapped it. He put it in her bag along with an apple and the water bottle he'd remembered this time without being reminded, which felt like a minor but real accomplishment given the previous 48 hours. The federal investigators arrived at his apartment at 9:15 after Emma was at school and he was on his second cup of coffee looking at the water stain on the bedroom ceiling from the doorway. Not for any particular reason, just looking at it the way you look at a thing you've been avoiding long enough that avoidance has become its own kind of habit. There were 2 of them. One was a man named Hartley, mid-40s, the patient and slightly rumpled manner of someone who had been doing this long enough to have stopped finding it interesting and had arrived at a professional equanimity that was almost indistinguishable from boredom. The other was a woman named Reyes, younger, sharper, around the edges. The kind of attentive stillness that Derek recognized as the professional version of the way Emma watched him from across the table when she was trying to figure out if he was actually okay. He let them in. He offered coffee. Hartley said yes. Reyes said no. They sat at his kitchen table, and Hartley set a small recorder in the center of it and asked if that was all right, and Derek said it was, because it was. "Mr. Callahan," Hartley said, wrapping both hands around his coffee mug with the appreciation of a man who had been awake since before Derek had. "We've read the statement you gave CPD yesterday. We have a few follow-up questions that fall outside their jurisdictional purview, if you don't mind." "Go ahead," Derek said. "The 5 individuals in custody are being held on federal charges related to the nature of what they were attempting to acquire. The operation itself, its origin, its funding, its specific targeting, is something we're working to establish. Part of that is understanding what happened inside the building from the perspective of everyone who was present." Hartley paused. "Your perspective is of particular interest to us." "I imagine it is," Derek said. Reyes hadn't looked at her notepad once. She was looking at Derek with the steady quality of someone running a continuous background assessment. Your CPD statement says you took advantage of an opening when the guard assigned to you became distracted, she said. Can you describe that in more detail? He turned to listen to his radio. I reacted. You reacted by incapacitating a trained operative and taking his weapon. That's what happened. And then you incapacitated 4 more. Over the course of about 30 minutes, yes. Reyes let a silence go by. Not uncomfortable, exactly. More like a space she was leaving open in case Derek wanted to fill it. He didn't. Mr. Callahan, Hartley said, setting his mug down, I want to be straightforward with you about something. We ran your name through the standard identification process yesterday afternoon. Your current employment, your address, your tax records, your daughter's school enrollment, all of that came back clean and clear and entirely consistent with who you told CPD you are. Good, Derek said. But, Hartley said, there's a gap. Prior to about 9 years ago, the documentation gets sparse. Not absent, just thin, in a particular way. He looked at Derek. You know what I mean by that. Derek drank his coffee. We're not here to create problems for you, Reyes said. Her voice had shifted slightly, still precise, but something in it had come down a register. Whatever your service history was, whatever the parameters of your current situation are, that's not our target. Our target is the network that hired these men. And our question is whether anything you saw or heard during the incident yesterday gives us a direction to work in. Derek considered this. He considered it honestly because Reyes had been straight with him, and that deserved a straight response, and because the network question was actually a question he'd been turning over himself since the night before. The commander, he said. Carver. He's the one who matters. The others were competent, but they were hired labor. Carver had operational knowledge. Not just the floor plan of the bank, but specific details about the system they were targeting. Details that would have required a source inside the contractor's organization or access to documents that don't move outside secure facilities. Reyes was writing now. His accent, Derek said, Eastern European, not Russian, maybe Georgian, maybe Armenian. I couldn't pin it down exactly, but somewhere in that corridor. And the way he talked about the operation. It wasn't like someone who'd been briefed. It was like someone who understood what the system actually did, not just what they'd been told it was worth. That's a different kind of knowledge. Hartley nodded slowly. That's helpful. There was also the photograph, Derek said. Both of them looked up. He showed Ms. Vaughn a photograph of a school. He said it was a contingency, something they had prepared in case the direct approach failed. He paused. That kind of contingency doesn't get prepared in the 48 hours before an operation. It's research. It means they had a target file that went beyond Ms. Vaughn and the bank. It means someone spent time identifying the people connected to this situation and mapping their vulnerabilities. Reyes put her pen down. She and Hartley exchanged a look that lasted approximately 1 second and communicated something Derek didn't have the full context to read but understood was significant. The school in the photograph, Reyes said carefully. Do you know which school it was? Whitmore Academy, Derek said. North Side. Another exchange of looks. Hartley picked up his mug, then set it back down without drinking from it. Mr. Callahan, can I ask, your daughter attends Whitmore Academy? She does, Derek said. The quality of the silence in the kitchen changed. Hartley said, You understood what he was showing Ms. Vaughn. I wasn't in the room, Derek said. Isabella told me about the photograph afterward. But you understand what it implies. I understand what it implies, Derek said. His voice was even. He had made it even. Which is why I'm telling you about it now, because if there's a network that did that kind of preparation for this operation, the operation ending badly for them doesn't necessarily mean the preparation stops mattering. Reyes was already reaching for her phone. We'll have a contact posted near the school today, she said. Plain clothes. Your daughter won't notice. She'll notice, Derek said. She's perceptive. But she won't know what she's noticing, so it's fine. Reyes almost smiled at that. Almost. They stayed another 40 minutes. By the end of it, Hartley had finished his coffee and poured himself a second cup without being offered, which Derek took as a sign that the conversation had relaxed into something more like an exchange and less like an interview. He answered what he could answer and said clearly when he couldn't answer something, and Hartley accepted both with equal equanimity, which confirmed Derek's initial read of him as someone who had been doing this long enough to know the difference between information being withheld in bad faith and information that had a legitimate boundary around it. When they left, Reyes paused in the doorway and turned back. "One more thing," she said. "The incident at the bank. The way it was resolved." She stopped, as if deciding exactly how to phrase what she was about to say. Whoever did that, did it the way it was done. They were protecting a specific set of people, not just neutralizing a threat. There's a difference in the pattern. Derek looked at her. "I just want to say," she said, "that the difference was noted." Then she left. He listened to their footsteps go down the stairwell, then the exterior door, then nothing. He stood in his kitchen for a moment with 2 empty coffee mugs and the quiet of an apartment where a child was at school, and the day was his to fill with whatever came next. He washed the mugs. He got his jacket. He went back to Meridian Fidelity Bank. The branch was open, operating with the particular determined normalcy of an institution that needed to demonstrate to its customers that a hostage situation was not going to affect its business hours. There was new carpet in the section near the front entrance, temporary, the kind that comes in rolls and doesn't quite match the existing floor. And 2 of the teller windows had been closed while the glass behind them was inspected or replaced or whatever happened to glass after a morning like the previous one. The rest of it was a bank. People were depositing checks. Someone was arguing very politely about an overdraft fee. Derek took a number, 23, and sat in the same chair he'd been sitting in when this had all started, which was either a coincidence of availability or something else, and he didn't examine which. His number was called in 7 minutes. The teller who helped him was a young man who looked like he was about 22 and had the careful alertness of someone who had spent the previous day hiding under his station and was doing an admirable job of not letting that show. Derek put his folder on the counter. "I have an error in a savings account," he said. "It's been going on for about 3 months. I have all the documentation." The young man looked at the folder. He looked at Derek. Something in his face suggested that after the previous day, a man with a folder of savings account documentation was the most welcome thing he'd seen all week. "Absolutely," he said. "Let me take a look." It took 40 minutes. There were 3 separate forms. 2 authorizations from a supervisor who came out of the back office with the distracted efficiency of someone managing 7 things at once, and a phone call to their account services team that put the teller on hold for 11 minutes, during which he apologized to Derek twice, and Derek said both times that it was fine, because it was. At the end of it, the $4,236 in misdirected contributions was confirmed to be transferring back to Emma's account within 3 to 5 business days. "Is there anything else I can help you with today, Mr. Callahan?" the teller asked. Derek picked up his folder. "No," he said. "That's everything I needed." He walked out into the July noon. The street was busy, the way downtown Chicago streets are busy at noon on a Friday. People moving in every direction with the purposeful randomness of a city that doesn't stop to check if you're keeping up. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked up at the building he'd just walked out of, the glass tower going up 30 stories into the flat white sky, and he thought about nothing in particular for about 15 seconds. Then he walked to the L station and went home. What? Isabella called again that evening. He'd half expected her to, and he answered on the second ring because letting it go to voicemail felt like an unnecessary extension of a conversation that he'd rather just have. "The account issue," she said. "I had someone reach out to the bank this morning." "I went in myself," he said. "It's handled." A pause. "You went back." "It was what I went there for." She was quiet for a moment on the other end, and he could hear in that quiet the particular quality of someone recalibrating, not frustrated, but adjusting. "You really did just go there to fix a bank error," she said. "That's what I said." "I know. I think I didn't entirely believe it at the time." Another pause. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I assumed, because people who do things usually want something for it," Derek said. "That's a reasonable assumption. You were wrong about me, but it's a reasonable assumption." "You're very direct," she said. "I don't have a lot of energy for the other thing." She made a short sound that might have been a laugh, quieter than he expected from her. "I've been in meetings all day," she said. "Federal liaisons, our board, legal, Everyone wants a piece of what happened yesterday. Everyone wants to understand it, categorize it, assign responsibility for it. He heard her exhale. It's exhausting. I imagine. And the answer they keep arriving at doesn't actually account for what happened. The internal conflict theory. It's what I told them, and they believe it because it's the explanation that requires the least amount of restructuring of what they think they know. She paused. I'm not complaining about that. I wanted them to believe it. I know. I just find it strange, she said, to sit in a room where people are building a detailed explanation for something, and to be the only person in the room who knows the explanation is wrong. Derek leaned back against the kitchen counter. Emma was in the living room watching something on the television, some animated thing with a lot of sound effects. He could hear it faintly. You get used to it, he said. Is that what it's like for you? Routinely? It was. Less so now. What changed? He looked toward the living room. On the television, something exploded cheerfully. Emma said something to herself that he couldn't quite make out and laughed at her own comment, which she'd been doing since she was 5, and which he'd never told her was one of his favorite things about her. I left, he said. That's what changed. Isabella was quiet again. Not the calculating quiet from the bank. This was different, more personal, like she was sitting with something she hadn't entirely expected to be sitting with. Can I ask you something? She said. You can ask. The people you were protecting yesterday, in the lobby, you didn't know any of them. No. But you... She stopped, started over. You could have stayed in the corridor after you took the first man's weapon. You had a gun and a radio and a head start. You could have found a way out of the building and let CPD handle it. Derek didn't answer immediately. Why didn't you? She asked. He thought about how to say it. He thought about the specific version of the answer that would be accurate without being either dramatic or dismissive, because both of those options were available and neither of them was right. There was a woman in the lobby crying, he said finally, when I was on the floor before I moved, crying quietly, trying not to make sound. I could hear her, and I knew that as long as those men had the room, she was going to keep doing that. He stopped. I don't know if that's an answer. It's what I've got. Isabella didn't say anything for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was different than it had been at any point in the conversation. Not softer exactly. More settled, like something in her that had been at a slight angle had straightened. It's an answer, she said. She came to see him in person on Saturday. He hadn't expected that. She'd mentioned the possibility at the end of the Friday call, said she wanted to talk about something specific, something she'd rather not do over the phone, and he'd said he'd be home in the afternoon, and that was as far as the planning had gone. He hadn't thought much about it after they'd hung up, mainly because Emma had appeared in the kitchen doorway at that moment, asking what was for dinner, and that question had occupied the rest of his evening. She arrived at 2 in a car that was understated in the specific way that expensive cars sometimes are. Nothing ostentatious, just too clean and too quiet to be ordinary. She was dressed differently than the bank. Jeans, a dark jacket, her hair down. She looked younger and also more tired, and he thought the combination probably represented something closer to what she actually looked like when she wasn't performing the CEO version of herself. Emma was at a neighbor's apartment 2 floors down, a Saturday arrangement with the Kowalski girl from her class, so the apartment was quiet when he let Isabella in. She stood in the living room and looked around with the attentiveness of someone who was seeing a place they'd been trying to form a picture of. The apartment was exactly what it was. Lived in, not neglected, books and Emma's schoolwork on the table, a drawing of Gerald the octopus family that Emma had torn out of her worksheet and taped to the refrigerator. Not a space that apologized for itself, but not a space that had been recently prepared for a visitor either. Isabella looked at the refrigerator drawing for a moment without commenting on it. Can I sit? She asked. Please, he said. She sat at the kitchen table, same chair Hartley had used yesterday morning. Derek sat across from her. He didn't offer coffee because it was 2 in the afternoon and he'd already had enough. I want to offer you something, she said, and I want to be clear before I say what it is that the offer stands whether you take it or not, and refusing it doesn't change anything between us. Okay, he said. My company has a security division, consulting, primarily. We advise defense contractors on operational security protocols, personnel vulnerability assessment, facility hardening. It's quiet work. Most of it happens remotely. It pays well. She looked at him. I'd like to bring you on as a senior advisor. The title doesn't matter. The hours are flexible. You can work around Emma's schedule. Derek looked at the table for a moment. I've looked at what your life looks like, she said. Practically, not intrusively. But I know what a school district maintenance job pays, and I know what a single parent in Chicago is dealing with in terms of cost of living, and I know that Emma's college fund was something you've been building carefully for years. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a job that would actually utilize what you're capable of, which is currently going to waste on HVAC scheduling. The HVAC scheduling is important, Derek said. I don't doubt it, and I'm not diminishing it. I'm saying that you're capable of more, and I have work that needs the kind of capability you have, and the combination seems straightforward. She paused. Also, I want you somewhere I can reach you. For my own peace of mind, which I'm aware is a selfish reason, but I'm including it because you said you don't have energy for anything other than directness. He looked at her. That's surprisingly honest. I find it saves time, she said. He was quiet for a moment, not deliberating exactly, more like letting the offer sit in the room long enough to get a sense of its actual weight. The federal investigators came yesterday, he said, Hartley and Reyes. She nodded. They came to see me Thursday evening. Long conversation. They're good, he said. Reyes especially. I thought so too. She waited. They flagged a concern about Emma, he said. The school. The photograph Carver showed you. Something moved through Isabella's expression. Brief, controlled, but genuine. I flagged the same concern before they did, she said. I should have mentioned it Thursday night when we talked. I'm sorry. I had someone pull the operation's known affiliates Friday morning and cross-reference them with... She stopped. I'm getting into detail you probably don't need. What did you find? Nothing that points directly at Emma, but the network that hired these men is still intact. The 5 in custody are the field layer. The people above them are still operating. She met his eyes. Which means the research they did doesn't disappear just because the operation failed. Derek already knew this. He'd known it since Thursday afternoon, from the moment he'd understood what the photograph meant. It had been sitting in the back of his awareness like a low-frequency noise, not loud enough to change what he did from moment to moment, but present in a way that didn't allow for complete quiet. The job you're describing, he said. The consulting work. Would it put me in the network's visibility? Isabella considered the question carefully, which told him she'd already considered it before arriving. It would put you in the orbit of people who might have the capability to identify the network, she said. Which is a different thing. My security division works with the kind of people who track groups like this for a living. If you're in that environment, you have access to information. You have the ability to know what's coming before it arrives. She paused. Right now, you don't have that. Right now, he was a school district maintenance worker who had taken out 5 mercenaries with a stolen radio and a crawl space and whatever was left of 12 years of operational instinct. He was operating with good reflexes and no intelligence. That was fine for a Thursday morning in a bank. It was not a sustainable strategy for a father with an 8-year-old daughter whose school had appeared in the research file of a paramilitary contractor. He knew that. He'd known it since Thursday afternoon. I need to think about it, he said. Of course. And I need it to be real work, he said. Not a placeholder, not a courtesy position. If I'm going to do it, I need it to actually matter. It would actually matter, she said. I wouldn't have driven over here on a Saturday if I was offering you a placeholder. He nodded once. From down the hall came the sound of the elevator and then footsteps in the corridor, the specific rhythm of one set of feet moving too fast to be anything other than a child returning from somewhere she'd been enjoying. Derek and Isabella both heard it at the same time, and the apartment's front door opened before Derek could stand up, and Emma came in at full speed and then stopped when she saw the woman at the kitchen table. Emma looked at Isabella. Isabella looked at Emma. Emma looked at her father. "Who's that?" she asked, in the direct manner of someone who found no reason to pretend she hadn't noticed something. "Her name is Isabella," Derek said. "She was at the bank on Thursday." Emma absorbed this. She came further into the kitchen and set her backpack on the floor by the counter and continued looking at Isabella with the frank assessment that she applied to most new situations. "Are you the one who called last night?" she asked. "Twice, actually," Isabella said. "Wednesday and last night." Emma nodded slowly, as if this confirmed a theory. Did you fix the bank thing, or did my dad fix it himself? Your dad fixed it himself, Isabella said. That's what I thought, Emma said. She turned to Derek. Can I have a snack? Fruit bowl, he said. She went to the fruit bowl and selected an apple with the deliberate consideration of someone choosing between options that actually mattered, then came back and stood beside the table and looked at Isabella again. Do you want one? She asked. No, thank you, Isabella said. Okay. Emma took her apple and went to the living room and turned on the television, and the animated sound effects started up again from the other room. Isabella looked at Derek. He looked back at her. She's very composed, Isabella said quietly. She has her moments, he said. She was crying about a purple octopus at 3 a.m. 2 days ago. Isabella smiled at that. A real one, not the boardroom version. It changed her face in a way he hadn't seen in the bank. The drawing on the refrigerator, she said. Gerald, Derek said. He's large but gentle. Good name for an octopus. She thought so. The afternoon light was coming through the kitchen window at the angle it hit at this hour in July, long and flat and golden in the dust. And the television was going in the next room, and the apartment felt, in that particular moment, like the specific thing it was. Not impressive, not aspirational, not a place that was trying to be anything other than where Derek Callahan and his daughter lived. Isabella looked around the kitchen one more time, at the fruit bowl, the dish rack, the refrigerator with Gerald on it, at the folder of bank paperwork that Derek had left on the counter and hadn't yet put away. Think about the offer, she said. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. I'll think about it, he said. And he meant it, which was the closest he'd come in 9 years to meaning something like that. He thought about it for 6 days. Not constantly. He wasn't built for that kind of sustained internal deliberation, and the daily requirements of his life didn't leave much room for it anyway. Emma needed lunches and homework help, and someone to sit with her through 45 minutes of a documentary about deep-sea creatures that she'd found on the internet and declared essential viewing, during which Derek learned more about bioluminescent anglerfish than he'd previously considered necessary. The school district needed 3 boilers inspected at the Lincoln Park campus and a report filed by Wednesday. The water stain on the bedroom ceiling was now accompanied by a soft spot in the drywall directly below it that suggested the building's roof had a problem that predated Derek's tenancy and was becoming gradually his problem anyway. Life continued at its own pace. It always did. He thought about Isabella's offer in the margins of it, waiting for the L, standing in the school pickup line on the 2 days a week he could get there in time, sitting at the kitchen table after Emma went to bed with a cup of coffee he'd pour, and then mostly not drink. He turned it over the way you turn over a decision that isn't simple, even when it appears simple from the outside. On the surface, it was obvious. Better money, flexible hours, work that used what he actually knew how to do. Emma's future more securely established. The network threat addressed from a position of information rather than reaction. He understood all of that. What gave him pause was something harder to name. He had left deliberately. That was the thing people who hadn't left didn't entirely understand. It wasn't retreat, it wasn't failure, it wasn't burnout in the clinical sense that the word gets used. It was a decision, made clearly and without ambivalence, on a specific afternoon 9 years ago, when he'd stood in a hospital room and watched a woman he loved fail to wake up from surgery that should have been routine and had not been, and understood in the hours that followed that he was now the only thing standing between Emma and the particular kind of alone that children who lose both parents carry with them into adulthood. He had left because Emma needed a father more than the country needed whatever he was. He believed that. He still believed it. What he was less certain about was whether the leaving had to be permanent, whether the decision to become Derek Callahan, school district maintenance worker, North Side Chicago, was a thing that closed a door permanently or just pulled it mostly shut. And whether what had happened at Meridian Fidelity Bank on a Thursday morning was a door someone else had pushed open, or one he'd walked through himself without fully recognizing that he was doing it. He didn't know. That was the honest answer. He was 37 years old, and he'd done significant things in his life, and he still didn't know how to tell, in the moment, whether something was happening to him or whether he was choosing to let it happen. On the 6th day, he called Isabella. Yes, he said, when she picked up. A pause. Yes to the offer? Yes to the offer. With conditions. Tell me the conditions. Emma's schedule is absolute. School events, pickups, sick days, those take priority over everything. No exceptions, no negotiations on a case-by-case basis. It's a standing policy, or it's not a deal. Agreed, she said without hesitation. I'm not a figurehead. If I'm identifying vulnerabilities in security protocols, the findings go somewhere real. I'm not writing reports that go into a drawer. Agreed. And I need to know what your company knows about the network that hired Carver, he said. Everything, whatever your security division has. Not because I'm going to do anything unilateral. I'm not. But I need to know what's out there, for Emma. This pause was longer. Not reluctance, more like she was making sure she could commit to what she was about to say. I'll have everything we have sent to you by Monday, she said. The federal investigators have already shared some of it with us through Griffith's channels. It's more than I expected. How bad is it? The network is real, larger than the 5 men in that bank. Carver was a contractor, 2 layers removed from whoever originated the operation. The origin is still being traced. She paused again. But here's what I can tell you as of this morning. There's no active secondary target on your family. Reyes's team confirmed it. The research they did on you was preparation for leverage, not for a separate operation. With Carver and his team in federal custody, that particular threat is contained. Derek absorbed this. For now, he said. For now, she agreed. Which is why your involvement matters. Because for now is not the same as permanently. He understood the distinction. He'd lived inside that distinction for 12 years before he'd left it behind. Monday, he said. Monday, she confirmed. And Derek, she said his first name with the slight deliberateness of someone using it for the first time and noticing that they're using it. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, he said. I'm going to be difficult to work with. I expect that, she said. I'm difficult to work with, too. We'll manage. He believed her, on both counts. He told Emma that night. Not the full version. Emma was 8, and the full version was not an 8-year-old story to carry. But enough. He'd learned early in his single-father tenure that the specific anxieties children develop tend to be less about the things they're told and more about the spaces between the things they're told, the silences that their imaginations fill in with whatever material is available. Emma's imagination was considerable. He'd rather give her accurate information in age-appropriate amounts than have her construct something in the gaps. He told her he was changing jobs. He told her the woman who'd been at the kitchen table on Saturday had offered him work that paid better and let him be around more. He told her the bank thing was fully resolved. He told her that some of the work might sometimes require focus and concentration, and that when he needed that, he was going to need her to give him space and not ask him 17 questions while he was doing it. Can I ask 15? She said. I'll consider 12. She thought about this. What kind of work? Security consulting. Helping companies figure out where they're vulnerable. Like figuring out where the holes are? Exactly like that. She nodded slowly, processing. Do you know how to do that? I used to do something like it a long time ago, he said. I was trained for it. Before you were the HVAC guy? Before I was the HVAC guy. She was quiet for a moment. She had her knees pulled up to her chest on the kitchen chair, which was a posture she adopted when she was thinking carefully about something rather than just reacting to it, and Derek had always read it as one of the more reliable signals that she was actually listening. Will you have to go away? She asked. For the job? Sometimes possibly. Not often. And never without planning it in advance and making sure you're somewhere good. Mrs. Kowalski's? Or Grandma Janet's? We'd figure it out. She uncurled slightly. Okay, she said. Okay? I mean, you already decided, she said. You said yes. I said yes to the conditions I wanted. I wanted to know what you thought. She looked at him with the particular expression she had that he'd never been able to fully categorize, something between old and young, between the kid who cried about octopus nightmares and the person she was going to be eventually. I think you should do things that use your brain properly, she said. You're smarter than boiler inspections. He looked at her for a moment. The boiler inspections are important. I know, Dad. The heating systems of 600 children, Dad. He stopped. I know, she said patiently. But still. He let it go. She wasn't wrong, and they both knew she wasn't wrong, And the fact that she was 8 and already operating with this level of clarity about things that most adults spent decades avoiding was something he'd long since stopped finding surprising, and had arrived at simply finding, with a complicated weight he couldn't always name, extraordinary. He made dinner. She set the table, which she did without being asked on the night she sensed he had a lot in his head, a sensitivity she'd developed without anyone teaching it to her. They ate together, and she told him about a disagreement she'd had with a girl in her class about whether sharks were actually dangerous or just misunderstood. And she had strong opinions on both sides of the argument simultaneously, which she didn't seem to find contradictory at all. After dinner, she went to do her reading, and he cleaned up and stood at the kitchen sink looking out the narrow window at the alley below, where someone had recently painted over old graffiti with a shade of gray that didn't quite match the surrounding wall, leaving a ghost of the original marks visible underneath. He thought about Sarah. He did this sometimes, not as a ritual, not deliberately, but the way you think about certain things when you're at a sink and your hands are in water and the ambient noise of the apartment has dropped to nothing and there's no immediate task requiring the front part of your brain. He thought about what she would say about this specific decision, not what she would have said 10 years ago when she'd been alive and they'd had arguments about exactly this kind of thing, about how long he could keep doing work that asked him to be absent, and what absent meant, and whether you could be fully present to one life, while most of yourself was somewhere else entirely. What she would say now, knowing Emma the way you know a child you raised, knowing what Emma needed from a parent. He thought she would say something practical and slightly pointed, the way she always had, and it would contain something he didn't entirely want to hear, and she would be right. He thought she'd probably say that doing this halfway wasn't an option, and that if he was going back into something resembling that world, he needed to do it with both eyes open and without the pretense that he was just a facilities worker who happened to consult occasionally on security protocols. She'd always had a low tolerance for pretense, even the comfortable kind, especially the comfortable kind. He thought she'd also say that Emma was fine, that Emma was going to be fine, not because everything would always be fine. Sarah had been too honest for that particular reassurance, but because Emma was exactly the person who would navigate whatever came toward her. And that was partially genetics and partially 9 years of a father who showed up every single day, even when showing up was the only thing he had to offer. He wasn't sure if thinking about what Sarah would say was the same as knowing what she would say. Probably not. But it helped, in the specific way that certain kinds of imagined conversations help, not by resolving anything, but by making the shape of the decision more visible. He drained the sink, he dried his hands. He went and knocked on Emma's door. "Yeah," she said. He opened it. She was on her bed with her book, stomach down, feet in the air. Gerald the octopus, a new iteration, this one on a post-it note, was stuck to the headboard above her. "You doing okay?" he asked. She looked up. "I'm reading." "I know. I'm asking if you're okay." She held the question for a moment with the same seriousness she gave everything. "Yeah," she said. "Are you?" "Yeah," he said. She went back to her book. He left the door open the way she liked it, and went to his room and sat on the edge of his bed and looked at the water stain on the ceiling. He was going to paint it. He'd decided this sometime in the last week without being aware that he'd decided it. He was going to get the right color match, and he was going to fix the underlying leak, and he was going to paint over the stain, and it was going to look different, and it was going to feel different, and he was going to let it. The following Monday, Isabella sent a car. Derek didn't ask her to. He'd planned to take the L, the same way he went everywhere. But the car was there at 7:45, and the driver said good morning, and Derek got in rather than stand on the sidewalk having an argument about symbolism with a man who was just doing his job. The Von Meridian offices occupied floors 19 through 24 of a building in the West Loop. The lobby had the hush of serious money spent on sound absorption, and the security desk clocked Derek in with the particular efficiency of a system that had been expecting him. Isabella met him at the elevator on 19. She looked like the version of herself from the bank. The blazer, the pulled-back hair, the precise attention. Not the Saturday version, the work version. He didn't mind. He'd shown up as the work version himself, clean shirt, had actually looked in a mirror before leaving, which felt like a responsible concession to the occasion. "How's Emma?" she asked as they walked. "She asked me to find out what your company's position on sharks is," he said. whether they're dangerous or misunderstood. Isabella considered this. Both, probably. That's what Emma said. Smart kid. She has her moments. The first 3 weeks were an adjustment that he'd been expecting, and that was still harder than he'd expected. Not the work itself, the work was familiar in its bones. The same kind of pattern recognition and vulnerability mapping he'd spent a decade doing in contexts with considerably higher immediate stakes. And the transition to a corporate security framework was more a change of language than of skill. He learned the language quickly. He always had. The harder part was the people. Von Meridian's security division had 11 full-time staff, most of them former law enforcement or military intelligence, several of them from agencies that also didn't list their phone numbers publicly. They were competent, professional, and deeply curious about the new senior advisor who had appeared without explanation in their department and who their CEO had clearly placed there with a specific intentionality that none of them could quite account for. They were also, to varying degrees, the kind of people who tested new colleagues. Not maliciously. It was professional culture, the same in military units and in civilian analogs, the instinct to establish where a new person actually sat in the hierarchy of competence before extending the specific kind of trust that meant something. Derek understood this. He'd done it himself. From the other side, more times than he could count. He let them test. He answered what was asked of him directly and without performance. He didn't try to establish credibility through anecdote or implication. He just did the work, and the work was good, and after about 2 weeks there was a shift in the department's collective posture toward him that he recognized as the specific shift that happens when a group stops evaluating someone and starts including them. A senior analyst named Drummond, former FBI, skeptical about most things as a baseline professional orientation, stopped by Derek's workspace on a Thursday afternoon and put a briefing document on his desk without comment. Derek looked at it. It was the network analysis, the full version, cross-referenced with what the federal investigators had shared through Griffith's channels. "Thought you'd want to see where we are on the Carver connection," Drummond said. He said it casually, the way you share something with a colleague, not the way you hand something to someone you're still not sure about. Derek read through it. It took 40 minutes. Drummond stayed, ostensibly working at the adjacent station but actually available, which was its own kind of gesture. The network was real, and it was larger than 5 men, and it was not, as these things almost never were, a single coherent organization with a headquarters and a leadership structure. It was a web. Contractors and brokers, and sourcing intermediaries, and a small number of actual principals who probably didn't know each other's full names. Carver was a contractor, as Isabella had said. The broker who'd hired him had already been identified by Reyes's team and was in the process of being rolled up through a federal investigation that was operating under a case number. Derek wasn't supposed to know, and that Drummond had included in the briefing in the way that someone operating in a certain tradition sometimes shares information that technically lives in a different lane. The targeting research on Derek himself, on his background, on Emma's school, had been done at the broker level, not by Carver, which meant it predated the Meridian Fidelity operation and had been commissioned as standard due diligence on potential leverage points in the overall operation. With the broker under federal investigation and Carver in custody, the specific thread that led to Emma's school was being unwound, not finished, being unwound. There was a difference. "The broker's going to flip," Drummond said, not looking up from his screen. "That's Reyes's read, and she's usually right about these things. When he does, the principals are going to have bigger problems than anyone at this company." "Timeline?" Derek said. "Months, maybe less. These things move at their own pace." Derek put the briefing down. He looked at the wall across from his desk for a moment, running the probabilities the way he'd been trained to run them, the same internal calculation that had been running at low volume in the background of the last 3 weeks. The honest assessment was this. The threat to Emma was real, had been real, and was decreasing at a rate that was meaningful but not yet complete. He was in the best possible position to monitor that rate. He had access to information he hadn't had 2 months ago. He had people around him who knew how to read the same signals he read, which meant he didn't have to read them alone. That was the thing about the life he'd built. The deliberately ordinary life, the maintenance job, the L-rides, the folders of bank paperwork. It had been safe in the way that small, contained things are safe. But it had also been solitary in a way he hadn't fully accounted for when he'd chosen it. He'd been doing the reading alone for 9 years, monitoring the background noise of a world he'd left, without any of the equipment or the allies that made that monitoring reliable. He hadn't known what he was missing until he wasn't missing it anymore. The call from Riaz came on a Wednesday afternoon in late August, 6 weeks after the bank. Derek was in a meeting when it came through, a technical review of a physical security audit for a logistics facility in Indianapolis, and he stepped out into the corridor to take it. The broker flipped, Reyes said. Faster than we expected. The federal case is moving. The principals? 2 of them are already in the process. A third is in a jurisdiction that requires coordination, so that's slower. But the domestic exposure is being addressed. She paused. The research file on your family has been formally logged as evidence and is part of the federal case, which means it's now a liability for anyone associated with the network, not an asset. You understand what I mean by that? He understood. It meant that the photograph of Emma's school had gone from being a tool someone might use to being a document that could put someone in federal prison. The calculus around it had inverted. Exploiting it now would be advertising participation in a federal case. Emma is clear, he said. It was half question, half statement. Emma is clear, Reyes confirmed. I wouldn't have called if she wasn't. He leaned against the corridor wall and looked at the neutral gray carpet under his feet for a moment. The relief was real and physical, a specific release of tension that he'd been managing at such a low conscious level for so long that he hadn't noticed how consistently it was there until it wasn't. Thank you, he said, for staying on it. You gave us the direction, Reyes said. The Carver details, the photograph, the accent. That's what opened the broker identification. A pause. You did good work in there, Mr. Callahan. The bank and after. We don't always get to say that to people. He didn't know what to do with that any more than he'd known what to do with Isabella's version of it in the weeks before. Some things didn't get easier to receive just because they were true. Take care of yourself, Reyes said, and hung up. He stood in the corridor for a moment, then went back into the meeting. He picked Emma up from school that afternoon himself. She came through the front doors in the specific burst of motion that school's end produced in her every day. Backpack slightly lopsided, one sock higher than the other, telling him something about her day before she'd fully reached him, the story already mid-sentence because in her mind it had started when she'd thought of it, not when he'd become available to hear it. And then Marcus said that wasn't true. But it is true, because I looked it up and the giant Pacific octopus can open jars, Dad. They've done experiments. Emma. And he said that doesn't count because they were trained, but they weren't trained. They figured it out, which is actually more impressive. Emma. She stopped, looked at him, read something in his face. What? Nothing bad, he said. Come on, let's walk. They walked. It was late August in Chicago, which meant the air still had heat in it, but the quality had changed. Something was leaving, the thick insistence of full summer thinning out into something lighter and more provisional. The trees on the block were still full, but they were starting to think about it. Emma walked beside him, and after a minute she put her hand in his, which she still did sometimes, and he had never once commented on because he understood that commenting on it might make her self-conscious about it, and he did not want that to happen for as long as possible. Is the work stuff okay? She asked. She was looking ahead, not at him, which meant she was asking seriously. Yeah, he said. It's okay. It's actually going well. Is it interesting? It is. Good. She kicked at a crack in the sidewalk as they walked over it. You seem less tired. He looked down at her. You noticed that? You were tired all the time before, she said. Not like sad tired, just like running on not enough. She glanced up. You seem like you have more now. He thought about how to respond to that. He thought about all the things he could say, about the job, about Isabella, about Reyes and the federal case and the network, and the specific way a threat being resolved produces more energy than you realize you'd spent containing it. All the adult context that Emma didn't have and didn't need. I do, he said finally. You're right. I have more. She nodded, satisfied, and looked back ahead at the sidewalk. Can we get ice cream? It's 4 in the afternoon. That's not a no. It's not a no, he conceded. There's a thing that nobody tells you about the choice to become ordinary. They talk about sacrifice. the giving up of significance, the trading of consequence for safety, the voluntary reduction of scale that parenthood or grief or exhaustion sometimes demands. They make it sound like a narrowing, a diminishment, as if the person who walks away from something large is necessarily becoming something smaller. What they don't say is that ordinary is not a single fixed thing, that the man who takes the L to work and makes the sandwiches and sits on the bench at school pickup and argues about ice cream is not a lesser version of the man who spent 12 years in places that don't appear on public maps. He's a different version. He's a version that got chosen, and the choosing mattered. Derek Callahan had not been broken by his previous life. He'd been changed by it, shaped by it, given capabilities and costs in roughly equal measure, and when he'd walked away, he hadn't abandoned what he was. He'd just put most of it in storage and gone to work on a different set of problems. The kind that involved an 8-year-old who needed a father. The kind that involved peanut butter sandwiches and water-stained ceilings and 3 months of bank paperwork. Those problems had been real. They had mattered. The fact that they were small scale was not the same as the fact that they were not worth the life he'd built around them. What had happened in Meridian Fidelity Bank on a Thursday morning had not returned him to his previous self. There was no previous self to return to. What it had done was something more complicated and more useful. It had demonstrated in about 40 minutes of very focused time that the two versions of himself he'd been managing as separate things were not actually separate. That the father who worried about water stains and forgot the water bottle and sat on undersized benches at school offices was the same person as the man who had moved through marble corridors with a stolen radio and a 12-year-old skill set, and that neither one of those things canceled the other out. He was both. He had always been both. The question that had taken him 6 days to answer hadn't really been whether to take Isabella's offer. It had been whether he was willing to stop pretending the storage unit didn't exist. Whether he was willing to let Emma see, in age-appropriate fragments, over time, at his own pace, that her father was not just Gerald the gentle octopus with the long arms. He was also something that had been shaped by fire and cold water, and 12 years of decisions that didn't have clean edges, and that thing was not going away, and it was not something to be ashamed of. And it was part of what stood between Emma and a world that had, on a Thursday morning in July, sent 5 men with suppressed rifles to a bank where she'd sent her father to fix an account error. That world was real. He'd known that. He just hadn't been willing to act like he knew it until the world had made the point too directly to sidestep. He bought Emma the ice cream. She got a flavor called Blue Moon that turned her tongue a color that didn't exist in nature, and she talked about octopuses for most of the walk home. And he listened to all of it with the specific quality of listening that parents develop. Not just to the content, but to the tone beneath it, the texture of a child's voice, when they're okay, genuinely okay. When the day was fine and the world is still the right size and the person walking next to you is reliably there. She was okay. He was okay. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, a great deal. The sun was getting lower over the west side of the city, the kind of end-of-summer light that makes Chicago look briefly like the city in the brochure version of itself, all that gold falling sideways across the brick. People were on their stoops. A dog was straining at a leash towards something invisible in a hedge. 2 kids across the street were doing something with a basketball that didn't quite resemble any organized game. Nobody noticed Derek Callahan walking home with his daughter. Nobody knew his name in connection with what had happened 6 weeks ago in a downtown bank. The news cycle had moved on, as it always did, to the next thing and the thing after that. Carver and his crew were a footnote in a federal case that would proceed slowly and without public fanfare through the system. The network was unwinding one thread at a time in the hands of people like Reyes who were patient and thorough and good at their jobs. The world, in its enormous indifference, had already filed the morning of July 10th under resolved and moved on. That was fine. That was honestly exactly how Derek would have chosen it if he'd been given the choice. Not every significant thing needed to be known. Not every person who stood between other people and something bad needed to be identified and thanked and entered into the record. Some things just happened and mattered and then became part of the past that the present was built on. And the people involved went home and made dinner and sat with their kids and let the days accumulate into something that felt, most of the time, like a life. Emma finished her ice cream. She wiped her blue-stained mouth on the back of her hand and then looked at the back of her hand and then, apparently deciding this was not her problem, put her hand back in his. Dad, she said. Yeah. Next time you go to the bank, she said, can I come? He thought about that Thursday morning. The lobby. The number 47. The chair where he'd sat down with his folder and looked across the room at a woman in a gray blazer who had no idea what was about to happen to any of them. Sure, he said. Can we get breakfast first? We'll see. That's a yes, she said. He didn't correct her. They walked the last block home in the turning August light, and behind them the city went on being itself, enormous and indifferent, and full of ordinary mornings waiting to become something else entirely, the way ordinary mornings sometimes do, without warning, without permission, and without the slightest regard for what you'd actually planned to do.